It's weird how things continue to change and also stay the same forever, you know? But it's good to see people not only figuring themselves out in terms of their transition and stuff, but also being able to have the strength to come out and be themselves again, even though they are in a social situation where they're going to be punished pretty severely for like not continuing the charade of being detrans. And I think it's sad for their community that they have to police each other so hard in order to be accepted. There's this article that was written on Slate. It's called "An Ex-Detransitioner Disavows the Anti-Trans Movement She Helped Spark." It's very similar to ex-gay communities, she now says. No one really changes. Though the mainstream press, especially in the UK, but not only there, often presents detransition as a deep, dark secret of the trans community, the issue is actually pretty simple. Something like 1 to 3% of people who begin a gender transition ultimately decide that it's not for them, and they backtrack or travel elsewhere across the landscape of gender identity. It's a straightforward question of individual needs and no cause for alarm, at least not in the abstract. However, in some cases, a person who once transitioned will turn against the concept of trans identity itself. These people form activist groups around the idea that gender ideology was the source of their confusion and pain. They call themselves detransitioners, and they advocate for limiting access to medical transition in the name of protecting others from making what they see as their mistakes. Detransitioners consider trans acceptance as being akin to a cult, and as I can attest, as a trans man and journalist who has tweeted critically of them before, they can respond with pronounced hostility toward anyone who questions their beliefs. Yeah, it's they accuse us of being weird and cultish, but it is they who defend the leader and like come after you for your wrong think. Like in truth, like it's actually very funny that I just had that thought. They get so pissy about like, you're trying to control what we say. You want to force us to call pregnant women pregnant people instead of pregnant women. Like you're trying to strip this away from us. But like usually like when this style is used, people say like pregnant women and people, or like pregnant people including women, not trying to strip women of anything, but like in the process of these people freaking out about, you can't call women people who menstruate, like they are themselves imposing like some amount of like wrong think on you, and like you're not allowed to use this language actually, because if you do, then we're going to try to get your funding taken away or whatever. Now, some former members of this so-called detransition movement have themselves grown disillusioned with detransition orthodoxy and are starting to speak out. They report that despite their efforts to change, they're still trans. They want people to know that the detransition movement couldn't fix them. Indeed, they never needed fixing in the first place. Kai Schevers is the most prominent of these apostates to date. She started transition to male when she entered college, before later ending her transition. She now again identifies as transmasculine. Think more Elliot Page, less Chaz Bono, and uses she/her pronouns. Interesting. That's interesting. From 2013 to early 2020, Schevers published under the name Crash Chaos Cats, writing and vlogging regularly about her detransition and the beliefs that led her to it. She was interviewed for 2 major articles on detransition, both by a cisgender female, or both of them were written by cisgender female journalists, Rachel Monroe and Katie Herzog. I know Katie Herzog's name. Both pieces tell the story of Schevers identifying as male as she entered college, starting testosterone soon after her mother's death by suicide, going off testosterone while still identifying as genderqueer. They end with her giving up her genderqueer identity and embracing the idea that not only her gender dysphoria, but all gender dysphoria was false and caused by internalized sexism combined with trauma, an idea that she then did advance and proliferate online. Today, Schevers has recanted this view. According to her, like the ex-gays of the 90s and 2000s, many of whom claimed that they overcame their sexuality after religious conversion only to reaffirm it later, some detransitioned people still struggle in private against feelings of gender dysphoria that they can never fully suppress. It's very similar to ex-gay communities where there's a story out there that people change and it's great and everything, but no one really changes. They learn to keep their desires under control. I think that many of us have suspected this. I think that some of the most like vocal detrans people are people who still struggle a lot. And I do frankly think that some of these people might be detransing in order to make money, because they're frankly being given a lot of time and attention in the media, Like, can you imagine being Helena Kirshner right now? Like, she is getting flown around the country. Like, that she's probably visited like an increasing number of states because they keep flying her in to talk to these, you know, speak in front of these city council meetings in opposition to youth healthcare and stuff. Like, the number of opportunities that you get by being a public detransitioner would be crazy. It would be crazy. I would make so much money if I publicly became it. It's so sad. I wish that I didn't have morals. Like, I really do. I wish that I could just sell out. Detransitioners may be a small group. Even the highest estimates are in the hundreds compared with an estimated number of trans people in the low millions. But they have been influential in pushing their denial that trans identity is real. Publicly, detransitioners disavow not only their individual transition histories, but also the fact that transition helps trans people worldwide to live comfortably in their own skin. A few men also identify as detransitioned. Most of the community congregates in sex-exclusive online forums for detransitioned women only. Yeah, detrans does tend to also be kind of a female, like assigned female-focused thing. Although we have recently discussed someone who was assigned male and supposedly had a very bad surgical experience and identified as detrans. Oh God. These people believe gender dysphoria is common among women and disappears when they learn to love and accept their female bodies. How many of these people are actually trans? Like, are actually gender dysphoric at least? Detransitioned women have gained influence because of strong interest in their stories by both anti-trans activists and some journalists. Yeah, protect the women, protect the breeding stock. You have to do everything you can. Like, the worst thing in the world is for a female to make themselves like unbreedable. In addition to being featured in countless horror stories aimed at frightening parents of gender nonconforming youth and undermining trans people organizing for their rights, this influence translated to a major loss for trans rights in the UK last December when Kira Bell, a detransitioned woman, successfully argued in court that doctors and parents of transgender youth were incapable of helping them to navigate decisions about transition-related treatment without court oversight. Yeah, are they fully doing that? Like, you're required to have the consent of the court in addition to, like, the medical oversight in order to... Yeah, no, NBJ, for sure. I could, by some definitions, be considered detrans because I have been on and off T. But, like, that, I mean, that's, like, the thing that I originally, like... You remember when Calvin Guerra made a video about me? Did you know that Calvin Guerra made a video about me? Like, a whole video about me, like 3 or 4 years ago, because I made a video about how I had quit testosterone and how I was like, it's okay if you do that too. Like, you can try hormones for a while, get some of the effects, and then stop taking it, and it'll be fine. And yeah, basically, like, there were accusations that I was detrans at that time. Like, I've been on T for 2 years, and then off for 2 years, and then on for 2 years. And now I'm currently off for about a year now. And, like, I may or may not go back on and off at various points in my life. It sort of fucking depends on what I want to do. I'm considering it right now because my body keeps trying to have periods, even though I just got the IUD put in, and they are way more painful now than they used to be. And I'm like, wow, I really just need this to stop. So there's like a number of different reasons why you would want to take T in the first place. I've also taken T in the past for the primary purpose of, like, I need to be emotionally stable right now, and I'm not. In, like, at that time with the estrogen, I was like not like able to control my emotions very well. And that's not to say that estrogen it causes that in all people. It's pretty common in trans people that we have emotional dysregulation when the wrong hormones are in our body. I have to balance, like, the fact that my brain works better on testosterone with the fact that I don't necessarily want the masculinizing effects all the time, which is very interesting. Yeah, detransition. I have, yeah, and because I am still so interested in surgical possibilities in the future, like, even medically, I don't think you consider me detrans, you know? Yeah, for us, T had us way more unstable and unhealthy, angrier, which is saying a lot. yeah, I guess that would be saying a lot. Do, re, mi, transition. True. Yeah, there's a very much a protect the women kind of thing going on here. Detransitioned women have gained influence because of strong interest in their stories, in addition to being featured in countless horror stories aimed at frightening parents of gender nonconforming youth. Wait, did I already read this? I did already read this, my bad. The Bell case was what finally prompted Schevers to go public with her criticisms of the detransitioned women's movement, despite being one of its founders. She says, it was Kira Bell in the UK, and seeing how detransition can be used to dramatically affect trans people's access to healthcare, she said. People give a certain weight to those detransition stories, and we always try to emphasize that there were a lot of us, but the gatherings that took place were not large. They never got more than 30 women, and not all of them were detransitioners. Trans people deserve access to support, and it makes no sense to shut down people's access to medical transition just because some people end up detransitioning. Blah, blah, blah. I thought it was time to duel right then. At age 35, Schevers is no longer saying she was wrong about everything, either in her transition or her detransition. She currently identifies as a transmasculine, butch, genderqueer, something like that, and said she/her pronouns contrast with her male-sounding voice and masculine presentation. She doesn't think that every single detransitioned woman is really trans and understands that others may have different experiences. Schevers believes strongly that every person deserves the right to question their gender identity and find their own paths. Recognizing the good in her detransition experience, I love this, saying, there's not always space in trans and queer communities for transmasculine people to talk about internalized misogyny. I could talk about it openly without worrying that people were going to be upset by it. She even sees the good in some of the ideology, which is based in radical feminist ideas about internalized misogyny and male violence. Not all the radical feminist ideas were terrible either. I learned a lot about women's history, Schevers said. A lot of what I read was pretty interesting, so I'm glad that I explored that stuff. Interesting. Like, coming out after being, like, kind of TERFy, I guess, and being like, I don't agree with their views, but I am glad that I at least learned some about that, like, feminist history. I can see that. As the detrans community that Schevers helped spark grew, its repressive and transphobic sides eventually became too much to ignore. Schevers found her gender dysphoria, which she once thought had disappeared for good, began to come back strongly over time. My sense of being a woman unraveled and was feeling more like a dude or a gender weirdo. But I was fighting against those feelings because I'd built a life in the detransition community, and I knew a lot of the other women in the community wouldn't be happy with it if I came out as trans. I tried to explain it in a radical feminist framework and find the root causes and do everything to make these feelings go away, and that didn't really work. The only thing that did work to make them go away was accepting them. I had to make a move to accept them. A second ex-member of the detransitioned women's community, whom I will call Max, confirmed Schevers' characterizations. Max, who identifies as transmasculine and asked to use she/her pronouns, quote, for now, requested to use a pseudonym and avoid identifying details. She's fearful of the harassment that detransitioned women and their anti-trans allies direct against trans people who disagree with them. There you go. I mean, like, it goes without saying, I guess, but, like, they do retaliate, and there is an amount of fear, really, that might be keeping some of these people in. Like, it's culty. They keep people in line with their consistent policing of behavior, basically. Oh my God, hit like if you haven't already, please. Schevers and Max don't know each other. While Schevers was becoming disillusioned and distancing herself from detrans circles, Max, who was in her early 20s, was beginning to explore detransition. She said she would watch Schevers' detransition videos, quote, obsessively. And then later, Max watched the negative response to Schevers leaving the community with discomfort. Unlike Schevers, Max was never a prominent detransitioner, although for a time her social media accounts attracted a following from detransitioners and anti-trans activists. Like Schevers, Max feels some insights gleaned from her time in the detransitioned women's community were worthwhile, particularly about the misogyny in the transmasculine community and learning to grapple with the feeling that there was no place to freely express doubts, fears, or regrets as a trans person. I just have to say, maybe it's just because of the particular groups that I'm in, because I am in non-binary specific groups, or at least non-binary open groups for the most part, like non-binary accepting groups, like on Facebook. So if I'm like in one of my non-binary top surgery groups or something like that, there are constantly conversations where people are like, did you feel hesitation or doubt, or like, did you regret after your surgery was over that you had your breasts removed? Like, some people are like, I kind of like my breasts, like, but they make my life really hard, and like, I don't know that I won't regret this if I do this. Like, we have these conversations internally. I don't know where these people hang out that they don't get to have these kind of conversations. But yeah, I do think it's an interesting point to make about the it's a valid thing to point out that there is misogyny in the transmasculine community. Like, but I don't think that that's like necessarily internalized misogyny in the sense that trans people are like trying to escape some kind of internalized misogyny. I think that what happens is that trans men really want to pass as male, and one of the things that you can do to do that is be really shitty to women. So, okay, let's resume reading. Oh, we got a bit left. We might not read the entire rest of the article. As a person of color, Max also has strong criticisms of how trans peers responded to her non-whiteness and of racism in the trans community at large. Understandable concerns. Whiteness does tend to be kind of dominant within the queer culture, just as it is within the mainstream culture. After coming out and beginning medical transition in college, Max had doubts that were exacerbated by complications from her treatment. She began reading and posting in online forums dedicated to detransition and eventually asked her friends and family to return to using she/her pronouns. She still feels that she transitioned much too quickly and thinks poorly of the therapist she saw during her transition. However, it didn't take long before the hateful attitudes towards trans people and widespread pressure not to retransition in the community began to trouble her. She says, I was feeling really confused about my gender and really frustrated about it, and frustrated with having to go on testosterone. I thought maybe I wouldn't need testosterone by immersing myself in that community, but I realized I still want tea, but I really feel like I shouldn't. Why did I feel like I shouldn't? I felt like I shouldn't because I'd been gulping down TERF rhetoric, she said, referring to the beliefs of trans exclusionary radical feminists. Asked why she wanted to speak up, Max offered her harshest criticisms of the movement. I guess the biggest thing for me was realizing I was taken advantage of. I was very recently trans and very recently detrans, and the people basically used my experiences as ammunition against trans people. I let it slide for a while because I was so used to being ignored and even ostracized by the trans community. We are fucking terrible about this. We need to be better about having camaraderie. The more we attack each other within our community, the more we send people into the arms of fucking detrans folks who love bomb the shit out of them. Like, oh my God. In talking to former and current members of the detrans community, I also spoke with people who described their experiences differently. Not everyone who detransitions experiences dysphoria again or holds transphobic views, emphasized one detransitioned 18-year-old from the UK, saying, I'd like people to know that detrans women genuinely possess a variety of viewpoints, and painting all of us with the same brush doesn't help anyone. This young woman, who asked to remain anonymous, said that transition may help dysphoria for some people and that she doesn't take issue with trans women using women's restrooms. She also believes that every study that shows medical transition is widely effective has major flaws, and that her own gender dysphoria stemmed from internalized misogyny. Interesting to simultaneously believe that transition can help people and trans women are women, also believing that every study that supports the idea that medical transition may help people who are dysphoric has major flaws, and that her own dysphoria was not like from being trans, it was just from misogyny. She said that confronting those misogynistic attitudes has reduced her own gender's dysphoria a great deal. I mean, yeah, I'm glad. That's interesting. Because of her very visible and central role in the detrans community, Schevers takes a lot of the responsibility for its most toxic aspects. She's clear that she now believes she and others in the community hurt trans people by telling them that dysphoria was internalized misogyny that would go away if they loved themselves enough. The detrans community, with her as a participant, also hurt trans people by allying with extreme anti-trans activists and giving them political ammunition against trans people, making detransition stories a central feature of anti-trans fear-mongering and supporting activism aimed at limiting access to medical transition. I'm glad that she's taking responsibility, at least, for her complicity in this. Schevers hopes that by putting her real name on this story and describing the patterns she helped perpetuate, her words will ring true despite her history of saying very different things than what she says now. One such pattern is treating the desire to transition as if it were a drug addiction, a persistent impulse to be guarded against throughout a formerly transitioned person's life. Schevers shared evidence of language detransitioned women had plucked from self-help groups, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, applied to the ongoing desire to appear male. Oh, wow. Really? So basically what she's saying is that the detrans people would try to like keep each other accountable Alcoholics Anonymous style to prevent them from retransitioning. Whoa. Terms like triggers and phrases like we commit, which are instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with 12-step programs. Not incidentally, this is exactly how many in the ex-gay movement view persistent romantic desires for members of the opposite sex, or for members of the same sex. Like it's a, wow, that's interesting. Like they just treat it like it's an addiction, basically. That's really fascinating. Contrary to these methods, the goal of transition is not to temporarily stave off gender dysphoria, treating it as a lifelong struggle against triggers, but instead to drastically reduce or eliminate such feelings permanently. Numerous studies representing an overwhelming medical consensus support this approach. Wait, what? The goal of transition is to just solve the problem, and all of the medical advice supports it. Thousands of trans people, including this reporter, can testify to the relief transition provides. Regret is rare, far rarer than the regret rates of other comparable treatments. This does not mean transition works for every single patient. No treatment can claim 100% success, and people with doubts and regrets about transition are real and deserve safe, affirming spaces to discuss these feelings. It does mean that transition is an effective treatment for gender dysphoria. In fact, transition, and not any amount of radical feminist ideology, self-help, or anti-trans paternalism, is the only effective treatment for gender dysphoria that currently exists. The ex-gay movement is much diminished, though far from gone these days, after many of its leaders have publicly come out as gay and admitted that, as hard as they prayed, the gayness never truly went away. Schevers and Max's stories are an early sign that in time, the detransition movement may be destined for the same ignoble fate. I didn't want to just stop there with reading the end of the article, because I also wanted to kind of go into a little bit of this ex-gay thing as well. There have been these same types of arguments made about, like, oh, if you just focus really hard and you will stop being gay, or like it's not so much about not being intrinsically gay as much as it's about you not behaving gay. So if we can like shock therapy you into being okay with having sex with women, that's the preferable outcome. Or like you can be celibate, you know, when the ex-gay thing is going around, that's kind of where the level of rhetoric was at. So just so that we can compare and see how this is similar to what we're experiencing today with this detrans movement. Here we go.
Victims. You've been lied to. You were not born this way, and you can heal.
Anthony Falzerano is preaching one of the more controversial and politically incorrect gospels of the day.
The politically incorrect gospel.
Homosexuals are made, not born.
That homosexuals are only come into existence after they've been, sexually molested, basically.
How many of you in this room were sexualized before the age of 18?
Through inappropriate early exposure to sexuality and emotionally absent fathers.
Victims.
So that's like, frankly, like the same shit gets said about trans people, where it's like, oh, you're only trans because you didn't have a father figure when you grew up or whatever. So Chloe Cole is a detransitioner who kind of has been cropping up in these conversations recently. Detransitioners wouldn't have to get political if the trans lobby med-industrial complex would stop selling, quote, gender-affirming surgeries and hormones as anything more than cosmetics. Like, this was Chloe's response to, like, comparing the ex-gay thing to the political detransitioner thing. So Chloe's response is, like, something about detransitioners wouldn't have to get political if the trans lobby wouldn't stop trying to force people to be trans or whatever. Erin Reed points out, note how she doesn't push back on political detransitioners being the new ex-gay movement. People Chloe testifies alongside explicitly support modern incarnations of that movement. Chloe, your existence and regret is yours, no one else's. Stay out of family's medical decisions. Yeah, we haven't gotten into it on stream yet. It's actually on my docket. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it because it feels like such an exhaustive topic to get into. But the city council meeting that they had in Florida, Chloe testified there being like, I'm a detransitioner. You shouldn't let trans kids have access to hormones. And the people that she speaks alongside are like people who previously have been like people who support conversion therapy against gay people, you know, like people who've been politically active for 20 years back when it used to be socially acceptable and appropriate, in fact, sometimes to, you know, oh my God. It's weird how things continue to change and also stay the same forever, you know? But it's good to see people not only figuring themselves out in terms of their transition and stuff, but also being able to have the strength to come out and be themselves again even though they are in a social situation where they're going to be punished pretty severely for like not continuing the charade of being detrans. And I think it's sad for their community that they have to police each other so hard in order to be accepted. Like, I think that there are subgroups within the trans community that do that as well, but I think overall we're starting to get a little bit better at it, or at least I hope that we're starting to get a little bit better at it, because I want more comrades than enemies at the end of the day. Mickey said, yeah, I got top surgery, but I went non-flat, removed most of the breast tissue, because I couldn't imagine being completely flat, but I was in those groups too, and we talked all the time about top surgery options. There are people who get gender affirming top surgery and it's just a radical reduction. Like maybe they have like really very, very large breasts and they like get them down to like a C cup so that they can bind if they want to have the option, but they still have boobs, you know, like, and those people are welcome in those Facebook groups. They are part of the community effectively. Oh, it is also worth pointing out that they didn't even say sexual abuse. They said, quote, inappropriately sexualized, which could be that they watched porn in the religious context, which is insanely common for heterosexual boys, for instance. A frustrating lack of precision and weaponization of wording. Yeah, I hadn't picked up on that. I assumed that inappropriately sexualized, that they were trying to evoke molestation, but I didn't know that that was a phrase used in the religious context for also like watching porn. Like that is inappropriately sexualizing the children for them to stumble upon porn. That's crazy. Lumiru had breast reduction surgery. Pretty sure they still have boobs though. Yeah, I think that that's the case. Like Lumiru is an example of a non-binary person who had a radical reduction and is still trans, like uses any all pronouns, I think. Like any all except for she and he. You posted a link in chat. Oh, here we go. Oh my god, I need to send you this post she made when her ex literally had to convince her that they're doing trans conversion therapy. Okay, what is this? Seeing myself in the stories of other conversion therapy survivors. Back when I was still in the detransitioned radical feminist community. Wow, I can't highlight this or you will not be able to see anything. I watched The Miseducation of Cameron Post with another detransitioned woman. That movie is about a teenage lesbian in the US who's sent to an ex-gay camp after she's caught messing around with another teenage girl. Part of what they do at the camp is to look for root causes of being gay and try to find what's behind their feelings. What kind of trauma or other experiences supposedly caused their same-sex attraction disorder. The gay kids have to fill out a worksheet with an iceberg on it. The tip of the iceberg represents being gay, and the larger section of the iceberg underneath the water is supposed to symbolize their real underlying problem. Oh no. Oh no. Oh my god. Yeah, but all is lost. Yeah, that's a point that Natalie Wynn made at one point. We would have less people regretting gender affirming surgery if trans meds and cis people stopped saying you need to want surgery to be trans. Yeah. Their gayness and or gender nonconformity is supposed to be a symptom of this larger problem, usually unresolved trauma or experiences in childhood that supposedly interrupted their normal development. After we watched this movie, the other detransitioned woman told me that the iceberg exercise and other ways the counselors at the camp approached being gay reminded her of how she talks to people trying to overcome gender dysphoria. Oh no, she just realizing in real time. At the time, this woman, Devra Zahav, was one of the main leaders and organizers of the detransitioned radical feminist community. She set herself up as someone who had worked through her own gender dysphoria, made peace with being a woman and having a female body, and who was now able and eager to help others do the same, relying heavily on radical feminist and lesbian separatist literature, as well as her background going to therapy support groups, 12-step groups, and using the courage to heal to process her own trauma. She believed that trauma could cause, quote, women to disidentify from being female and reject their female bodies and womanhood, create trans or genderqueer identities as a dissociative disorder. Wow. So much pathologization. I was one of the first people she corresponded with. Watching that movie made her anxious because, much like the people in it, she encouraged people to treat their gender dysphoria as a symptom of a larger unconscious problem. She told people that they needed to discover what was behind their feelings in order to find this root trauma or problem and heal from it. She asked me how she was different from those people in the movie, and I knew she was asking me to find a way to deny that what we were doing in our own community was more or less the same thing, that we were practicing our own kind of conversion therapy. This was a reoccurring pattern in our relationship where she would turn to me to help her rationalize and deny harmful behavior. I don't remember what I said, but I came up with some bullshit answer about why what she did was different from what the ex-gay people in the movie were doing. She asked me to help. She was asking me to help hide what she was doing from herself, and I did my best to do so, while at the same time knowing on some level that I was concealing the truth from both of us. I was even bold enough to say that I felt like I could understood and relate to what those ex-gay people were trying to do by digging into their feelings, while also asserting that what we were doing was completely different. I suppose the main reasons we thought we were different was because we weren't anti-gay and encouraged people to unlearn internalized homophobia as a way to, quote, overcome gender dysphoria. And we thought that our methods actually worked, except that they weren't working for me anymore, and it was getting harder and harder for me to pretend otherwise. Oh no. Yeah, I don't want to read the whole rest of this article tonight, but that's pretty funny. It's as funny as it can be while it's also kind of sad. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all of my patrons for supporting this work that I do. I appreciate every single one of you, but I want to especially shout out Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Amanda B., Heather Clarkson, Michelle Winter, R. Halverson, Athiette, Sarah A., Wellington Marcus, Nova, Mr. Atheist, Elizabeth Bartell, Suzanne Maynard, Sojo, and Bean.